Honorable members of parliament, dear experts, distinguished guests, just a moment. Sorry, we were checking the interpretation. Honorable members of parliament, dear experts, distinguished guests, I'm pleased to welcome you to a web dialogue on institutionalizing gender mainstreaming in parliament, participatory gender audits and gender action plans. This event is jointly organized by OSCE Parliamentary Assembly and OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, ODIHR. My name is Hanna Djogovic, and I'm a program officer for OSCE PA's International Secretariat in Vienna. I will be facilitating this event today. Today, we will be exploring and exchanging views on a unique role that national parliaments as democratic institutions have in transformation of our societies towards gender equality. This crucial role for parliaments has been well entrenched in numerous international conventions and commitments, such as the 1995 Beijing Declaration. On one hand, national parliaments are responsible for producing gender-sensitive and gender-responsive policy outcomes through decision-making and through the adoption of legislation within their competence, or indirectly through gender-sensitive oversight of the executive. On the other hand, national parliaments have a responsibility to respond to the needs and interests of both men and women inside their own composition, structure, operations, working methods, and day-to-day work. Having this in mind, today's event has two aims. On one hand, it aims to launch the practical guidance document on participatory gender audits, which was published together with ODIHR and OSCE PA in 2022. This publication is available in English and Russian languages and available online. On the other hand, this event aims to discuss the application of gender audits and gender action plans in parliaments and to facilitate discussion on possible steps to be taken to work towards gender-sensitive parliaments. Before we begin, I would like to provide a brief overview of the agenda and mention a couple of technical details that are important for today's event. We will first start with the opening remarks, which will officially launch the event. These will be followed first by the presentation of the guidance document and then the expert panel on parliamentary experiences with gender audits and gender action plans. After this, we will have an opportunity for the questions and answer session among participants. Finally, we will have concluding remarks summarizing highlights of expert presentation and discussion. Allow me now just a few technical announcements before we begin. Please note that this event is being recorded and live streamed. It is taking place in English and Russian languages. Also, the interpretation to international sign language is available. Online requests to speak should be written in the chat or indicated by simply raising your hand. We will keep track of your requests, collect them all, and then I will give you the floor during the debate. To ensure a smooth experience, I kindly ask all participants to mute their microphone whenever not speaking. Likewise, please unmute your microphone only when given the floor. I would like to encourage you to keep your cameras on during the entire event, as this is also an opportunity to see each other and virtually meet with your colleagues. Finally, I would encourage all speakers from the floor to limit their intervention to maximum 3 minutes during the debate. Without further delay, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the President of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, Ms. Margareta Cederfelt, who is today with us in our office in Vienna. Ms. Cederfelt, I am sure you are aware, is a distinguished Swedish parliamentarian who was elected last July for the second time as the OSCE PA President. Ms. Cederfelt, you have the floor. You can sit here.
Morning. Honorable parliamentarians, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to warmly welcome you to today's ODIHR OSCE Parliamentary Assembly joint web dialogue on institutionalizing gender mainstreaming in parliament, participatory gender audit and gender action plans. Please let me first extend a congratulations to everyone from ODIHR and the OSCE PA involved in the development and publishing of the step-by-step guide on participatory gender audits in Parliament. But I would take this opportunity as well to particularly congratulate my dear colleague, Dr. Heidi Frey, Special Representative on Gender Issue inside OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, for her effortless work for gender, for increasing women's participation and awareness in the political assembly. Thank you. Advancing gender equality in national parliaments is a priority for the OSCE PA. And I am very glad to see that the steps we are taking together with our colleagues from ODIHR towards achieving this goal. But I would also like to mention that there is a need, of course, for a systematic work. And that's why I think the guidelines and the audit is very important tools to use. As parliamentarians, we have an important role to play to achieving gender equality. As a first step, we should promote gender equality within our own circuits, our own national parliament. And we should work to make our parliament more gender sensitive. But I would also like to underline that there need to be also a collaboration cross countries, cross borders, and inside OSCE PA as a whole to achieve a true gender balance. The guidance document is an important tool to accomplish this. It sets out a clear framework for the implementation of participatory gender audits in parliaments, while at the same time recognizing the special characteristics and the uniqueness of each parliament. I cannot stress enough the importance of conducting gender audits. Not only does it help to improve gender equality within national parliament, it is also helps to examine activities from a gender perspective and identifies the strengths and weakness from an institution's perspective. Undertaking this exercise also recognize that parliaments to always have the possibility to improve its work on gender. Even in the most democratic political environments. And I would here take the opportunity to mention as parliamentarian that it's not only the parliament who benefit. I would underline that those who benefit most of a gender audit and the gender action plan is the people who vote for us as parliamentarians. Because we know that women and men are have different experience, different look on the future. And I believe strongly that if we should have a parliament who represents the whole society and the whole society's experience, we need, of course, to also include women and women's perspective in the political work. As I mentioned earlier, to achieve a greater gender equality in the OSCE region, it requires taking collective actions. And this is why publications and events like today's are valuable to exchange experience and lessons learned. The OSCE PA itself is a useful platform where we can continue to exchange gender issues. But let me also give a picture from how is the gender situation inside OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. About 23% of the delegates are women. Some years ago, was it a little bit higher, 28%. But I would also underline here, it's the national parliament who appoint their delegations. And if there should be a higher number, a higher level of women inside OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, there need to be more women who are appointed to the national OSCE delegation. And maybe there need to be more women in parliament or another focus. I just mentioned this because I can see the importance of include women in the work of security. I am very pleased to see the high interest in today's event, and the guiding documents are caused within the Assembly's national delegations, civil society, and the wider public. I hope that today's event will serve to further reinforce our cooperation in support of gender equality within the OSCE region. I wish you an interesting and productive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Sederfeld, for these wonderful and inspiring words and for your strong commitment toward gender issues within the PA. It is now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Matteo Mecacci, Director of OSCE ODIHR, who I believe does not need a special introduction. Mr. Mecacci, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, dear Margareta, dear friends, colleagues of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, speakers, all the participants. I can see there actually, as Margareta mentioned, there is a strong interest from many across the OSCE region. So welcome to you all to this high-level launch event of our latest ODIHR guide on participatory gender audits of parliaments. Across modern democracies, including those in the OSCE region, women have been present in parliament chambers for over a century. And while never constituting a majority of those chambers, women's presence has become increasingly normalized in these institutions of representative democracy. This has not, however, been achieved by chance. It has required considerable political mobilization, often by women thinking strategically and acting collectively. Just as an overall picture, as of 2023, the OSCE region is advancing in the representation of women across the parliaments of its 57 participating states, ranging from near parity in some countries to a little less than 15% in others. The OSCE regional average is now at 31%, with a symbolic increase of 0.5% compared to 2022. As our final goal remains gender parity, which means 50-50, equal representation at all levels and in all branches of government, is a long way still ahead of us. Indeed, without equal women representation, our democracies are flawed and cannot claim to be truly representative. This we have to continue to remember. As women MPs enter parliaments in larger numbers, the call for transforming these bodies from within is also getting louder. Parliaments need to enable the meaningful participation of women MPs and parliamentary staff in all their internal processes. And in order to do so, it is crucial that the different needs, views, and beliefs of women and men are reflected in lawmaking and parliamentary oversight processes. Women need to feel represented in laws and other policies that parliaments produce and to have a meaningful opportunity to influence them. In this transformation, male political leaders play a key role. It is up to us, men, to also rethink the way we do politics and our daily business. We should ask ourselves, are we ensuring that the voices of women are heard and considered? Are we applying biases and stereotypes, even unconsciously, and in a parliamentary setting, how does this affect the laws and policies that we are adopting or making? ODIHR is ready to assist parliaments in this transformation. Through our work, we continue to collect good practices and lessons learned and produce practical guides, like our, and I quote, Realizing Gender Equality in Parliament, end of quote. It's a publication from last year, published in 2022. We are also working directly with your parliaments on the ground. Over the last 2 decades, we have worked with dozens of parliamentary chambers, supporting the setup of alliances of women MPs and of gender equality committees. We have provided legislative reviews of laws and delivered capacity building for members of parliament and parliamentary staff. Over time, we have learned that these activities are important, but they're not enough. Parliaments need systemic changes if they want to lead by example. So in the last years, we have been conducting a participatory gender audits of parliaments and supporting them in developing parliamentary gender action plans. The latest ODIHR step-by-step guide on gender audits of parliaments we launched today is based on the unique experience from working with the parliaments in Western Europe, the Balkans, and Central Asia. And actually, we see the interest in this topic really across all the OSCE region. This is an issue that I think will benefit all of our society, irrespective of their constitution or parliamentary system that may have. Today, you will hear more about this latest guide, but also about direct experience from selected parliaments. In closing, let me express my gratitude to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly for being our partner in realizing this publication. It is true that without your contribution, such a process would have never been a success and would have not been possible. So I want to thank you, really, our colleagues, and I wish all of us a fruitful event and look forward to our common work in the future, as this topic is certainly going to stay with us for some time to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mekachi, for your encouraging words. The Parliamentary Assembly and its International Secretariat are very happy to enjoy outstanding cooperation with your team in ODIHR, and we are extremely proud of our joint publication. We really hope that it is only the first in many to come. Without further delay, I would like to give the floor to my dear colleague, Sasha Gavric, who is a gender officer in ODIHR, and who will provide you with the presentation of this new guidance tool. Sasha is regularly working with parliaments, political parties, and women's movements to advance gender equality in politics. Together with his unit, Sasha is supporting national parliaments in their institutional transformation by conducting all kinds of capacity building activities and implementing gender audits, as well as developing gender action plans. Sasha, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you a lot for this kind words. I will be sharing presentation that I've prepared. I will aim to make this presentation as engaging and as understandable and quick as possible. Zoom is a platform that we got used to, but of course is not as the same as when we meet in person. So let's go immediately into the presentation. So my goal today is basically to sell you today two gender mainstreaming tools, gender audits and gender action plans, two tools that we use in order to support parliaments in the OSCE region to better deliver for all women and men. I will start this presentation with 3 reminder slides. The first reminder slide is asking the question, where does this debate on gender-sensitive parliaments and the gender-sensitive parliament agenda come from? And as rightfully said by you, Hannah, a key moment was the 1995 Beijing conference, where basically all states of the world participated and agreed on a platform for action that introduced a somewhat not just transformative, but I would even dare to say revolutionary approach to programming, and that is the gender mainstreaming strategy. In Beijing, states agreed that the time has come to stop applying a fix the women approach and to start applying a fix the institution approach, so that we need to work on the transformation of institutions. International stakeholders like the Interparliamentary Union have taken this agenda forward, and in 2012, the IPU issued its plan of action, a document that is a principal guiding document for all of us when it comes to the agenda on gender-sensitive parliaments. Last year, the IPU re-engaged on the topic, and at its global conference in Rwanda, in Kigali, they adopted the IPU Kigali Declaration, a document that reminds all national parliaments, including the national parliaments of the OSCE region, on their obligation to engage on gender-sensitive parliaments issues and concretely to conduct at least 2 gender audits in the upcoming 10 years, aiming at bringing the transformation forward. I'm very happy that the colleagues from the IPU are today with us. A very, very warm welcome to them. And then what happened in this period is that different stakeholders have joined this global community. As you can see, I've listed some of them below here, and I'm lucky that ODIHR and the OSCE PA are part of this community. My second reminder slide is about the question on what we want to change. And here is a presentation of an iceberg that stands symbolically for institutions and for the organizational culture of institutions. What we do want to change are the institutions. We do not want to only add women into the institutions. We do want to see a change that will be taking place in the visible part, so to say, of the iceberg, so the part that is above the water. So we want to change vision, strategy, structures, but we want also to change all the invisible elements of institutional and organizational culture. So issues that relate to the beliefs, the perceptions, the values, the unwritten rules and norms that are shaping significantly decision-making and the way how institutions, including parliaments, are conducting their work. The third and last reminder slide is a reminder on our goal. And here is a quote from the Realizing Gender Equality in Parliament guide that has been mentioned by our director, a quote that is basically a new definition that has been developed by Sarah Childs and Sonia Palmieri, 2 global leaders. And I'm happy that Sarah Childs is today with us in this discussion, in this event. This definition nicely reminds us what gender-sensitive parliaments are about. Gender-sensitive parliaments are about giving a value and priority of gender equality as a social, economic, and political objective. And in order to do so, gender-sensitive parliaments need to reorientate and transform the institutional cultural processes, practices, and the outputs towards those objectives. So those were the 3 reminder slides. Now let us look concretely into ODIHR's approach on gender-sensitive parliaments. In our Realizing Gender Equality in Parliament's publication that was published in December 2021, launched last year in spring with the OSCE. It seems that we are having a tradition to kick off the years, or developing a tradition to kick off the years with common events. In this guide, we have conceptualized gender-sensitive parliaments to be reviewed and understood under the three dimensions or functions of parliament. So when it comes to parliamentary representation, lawmaking, and parliamentary oversight. And in order to make gender-sensitive parliaments work in reality in the parliaments, we have complemented this overall study with the participatory gender audits of parliaments step-by-step guidance document. A key message from the new publication, and I will share later the link to the publication where you can download either the English or Russian language version. A key message is that we believe that an institutional change process of a parliament needs to start with a gender audit of the parliament. So something with which we second the proposal and the recommendation from the IPU Kigali Declaration and other IPU documents. As you can see here, we understand the transformation of parliaments not as a linear process. So you go from A to B, you do a gender audit, and then you have conducted transformation of a parliament. No, we understand it as a cycle. We understand that a transformation of an institution is a cycle, and that we always have to go through the cycle. The first point of this cycle is the assessment. So it is the gender audit of an institution, in our case of the parliaments, that will allow us to look in depth into the way how parliaments are performing and how they are conducting and integrating gender equality into their work. When implementing an audit, parliaments will develop very concrete recommendations, which will lead to a gender action plan. And that's the second point here. And then afterwards, it is of immense importance that parliaments also assign very concrete resources, not just financial, but also human resources that will allow the implementation of those recommendations, which after a few years will lead us to the review of the work that has been done, and in a way will bring us back to the beginning of the cycle. Our dear speaker from Sweden later on will share about their experience, how Sweden has gone basically 4 times through this cycle and what type of changes have been achieved. And now let's look shortly into the content of the gender audit step-by-step guidance documents. So as said, we believe that it is important to audit all 3 parliamentary functions. The first dimension and function is the question of gender-sensitive representation. Here are some of the areas that we are looking into. Very obvious, we are looking into the way how women are elected and represented in the parliament, how leadership roles are being assigned, but we're also looking into the somewhat informal and maybe less visible elements of a political career, like caring responsibility. We are looking into the issue of dignity and respect. We're looking into the issue of violence against women. And under the representation dimension, we're also looking into the question of parliamentary staff. Parliamentary staff are a backbone of parliaments, and in that sense, they should receive adequate attention as part of an audit. In the second dimension of our guide, we are looking into gender-sensitive lawmaking. We are aiming at assessing on how parliaments are taking into account sex disaggregated data, how they are integrating gender analysis and gender impact assessments into the legislative process. And specifically, we're asking about the question, where is the money? Because parliaments play an incredible role when approving the annual budget, when reviewing and assessing the implementation of the annual budget. And of course, it is of immense importance that gender is being taken into account when developing and approving annual budgets of the institutions. And lastly, the third dimension, as said, is the dimension of oversight. We believe that parliaments should have very strong parliamentary bodies, informal but also formal bodies, that will make sure that gender equality is being taken into account in the lawmaking process, but also, of course, in the oversight process, those parliamentary bodies will have adequate expertise, adequate staff, adequate tools in order to monitor and to control, so to say, how institutions are performing and how they are implementing legislation in a country. An important moment that we have integrated into the step-by-step guidance document is also the role of the parliaments in monitoring the implementation of international standards. And we have just given here an example that parliaments should play a role in monitoring the implementation of the concluding observations from the CEDAW committee, but this of course includes also other international standards. Our step-by-step guidance document, and I'm coming closely to an end to the presentation of the document, presents also the concrete steps that need to be taken. I will not go into the details here, but we believe that a gender audit process is not a one-off event. It is something that takes for a few weeks, even few months in reality, that it includes very diverse aspects like a desk review, that it includes an in-person data collection through interviews, focus groups, and workshops, that those data should be triangulated, as we say in social science, so that it should be cross linked with other information that is available, and that the data that will be collected and will be presented in the report should be then also verified with the parliament, so that the parliament stands behind the entire gender audit report, as at the end the gender audit report is not an external assessment tool. So somebody comes in and assesses, and then the parliament needs to implement those recommendations. It is a participatory process. It is a process that is owned by the parliament, and in that sense, it is very important that also each recommendation and conclusion is being owned by the parliament. An audit doesn't end with an audit. It ends with an audit report, but that report is basically only a beginning of a parliamentary gender action plan. And our guide clearly recommends parliaments to take upon the recommendations and to make sure that the recommendations are being implemented in a follow-up process, as said, as part of this cycle. Lastly, a slide on what ODIHR can offer. The room, our Zoom room, is full of parliamentarians from all around the OSCE region. This is an overview on what we do. The orange side is concretely related to the audit preparation and implementation. So what we are doing is, for example, delivering informative workshops for MPs and staff to kick off a debate around gender-sensitive parliaments. Just in March, we will be traveling to beautiful Ljubljana, to Slovenia, to have such an event with the Slovenian parliament and the leadership of the parliament. We're also conducting ourselves gender audits with a selected number of gender audits. 2021, we have done an audit with the Maltese parliament. Last year, we have kicked off a gender audit with the parliament of Kyrgyzstan, and we're at the moment in negotiations with other parliaments in Southeast Europe. We do also stay available to provide advice and support in case of self-organized audit processes. So we don't have to do your audit. If a parliament decides to take the lead on its own and to work with national experts, ODIHR stands ready to provide advice through Zoom meetings, through a call, and just to be there to guide and share lessons learned from the processes of gender audits we have seen in other locations. On the green side of this slide, you will see some form of follow-up activities that we do. So we provide legal reviews of rules of procedures, code of ethics, code of conduct, and other policies of parliaments. We have done that with North Macedonia in 2020. We are doing just now a review of the rules of procedure of Kyrgyzstan. So that is a very important component because gender needs to be integrated also into the policies of the parliament. We support gender audit recommendations implementation. We have done that a few years ago, for example, with the Parliament of Montenegro in the previous convocation. And an important component is also in-depth capacity building of MPs and staff on the question of gender-sensitive lawmaking, for example. And this has been done last year in Skopje with the Parliament of North Macedonia, where we have trained staff last July in 2020. So this is a very diverse overview of activities that we do. We stand ready. This is my contact if you want to follow up with us. The team under the leadership of Juliana Testova, myself, my dear colleague Sara Hapalainen, and others are standing ready to support the parliaments. I will close the presentation here, and I stay available later on during the question and answer session to answer all potential questions that you might have. Thank you a lot.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for this interesting presentation and for clearly outlining the new guidance document. And with this, I would really like to encourage all members of the OSCE delegations, in case their parliaments are planning to conduct any sort of gender auditing or to develop some sort of gender action plan, to really approach you and your team or us, and we will put them in touch with you, since you can really provide invaluable assistance to them. With this, I would suggest that we move straight to the parliamentary discussion. We have three passionate speakers to introduce us to the parliamentary perspective of realizing gender equality. Unfortunately, Dr. Hedy Fry, OSCE Special Representative on Gender Issues, has just let us know that due to an illness, she's not able to join this event. However, I would like to highlight what she wanted to highlight in her remarks, and that is that first, that the parliaments across the OSCE region really must prioritize efforts to address gender inequality and to increase gender responsiveness. And second, she really valued this step-by-step guidance document, and she truly encouraged all parliamentarians to use this document as a tool to integrate gender perspectives systematically and effectively in their work, all in order to achieve positive outcomes for gender equality. I'm sure that Dr. Fry will join us in our future efforts in promoting gender equality. And we're certainly saying hi to her at the moment. Our next speaker, without further delay, is Professor Sarah Childs, an international critical actor working on gender-sensitive parliaments, combining academia and practical work. Sarah Childs is personal chair of politics and gender at the University of Edinburgh. In her research and theoretical work, she has shaped the global representation and UK politics. Among others, she has been seconded to the UK Parliament, conducting there a gender audit, which has resulted with the Good Parliament report. Therefore, she has invaluable experience that she will now share with us. And also, she is currently advising multiple parliaments around the world, among others, the Scottish Parliament. And she's also working with many international stakeholders, such as the IPU and ODIHR. Professor Childs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And it's really wonderful to be participating today with all of you and being what I think really is a truly global movement to gender sensitized parliaments. And I think that, it's important for us to recognize that transforming our parliaments is no longer the work of a few committed women MPs and a few good men who support us, as critical as male allies as they are, but it's about parliaments as institutions changing themselves for the good of democracy, for healthy democracies. I think it was wonderful to hear Sasha recognise the multiple organisations, international organisations that really have created this international democratic standard of being gender sensitive, that gender insensitive parliaments are failing as democracy. And I think it was very good to have recognised that ecosystem of international organisations working on this, and to recognise too that a gender sensitive parliament's definition will not change very much, and that really we have to think about the processes of institutional change. So a broad definition is very important in the abstract, but actually we need to translate commitments to gender sensitive parliaments into workable reforms. They need to be technically accurate for a particular parliament, but also politically viable. And I think that's something else I would stress from the perspective of an academic outsider coming into institutions, is that whilst academics and other researchers and civil society actors will often have a very good grasp of what's wrong and where a parliament needs to end up, it also matters that we, where we're involved, work with an institution to ensure that what we offer is something grounded in the particularities of an institution. And above all, that we embed processes of change. Sasha was quite right. An audit is the beginning, the notion of a cycle. And I stress here too that in the Kigali Declaration, one of the first acts, the 10 acts for the next 10 years, is to have more than one audit to ensure that process. And it's why when I wrote my report on the British Parliament, I ensured, or at least I recommended, I couldn't ensure, I didn't have that much power, but I recommended that a formal IPU audit was undertaken and that this was reviewed. And very pleased to say that actually did happen in the UK Parliament following my report. So institutionalization is really important for us to think about. Reforms that stick become part of the everyday working of the institution. That's what makes gender sensitive practices and infrastructure stick, is they're institutionalized. They happen routinely. They become part of the everyday, established and normal way. And in order to ensure that happens, I think anybody beginning or embarking on a process of gender sensitive parliamentary change has to recognize the political dynamics that already exist in an institution and to be very clear about that. And sometimes that's harder for insiders. So one of the points I'd like to stress in my short talk today is the potential to draw on what is a truly global community of gender and politics scholars, many of whom are familiar with the international toolkits and approaches and guidelines and standards, and are often very willing to work and be supporters of parliamentary change. And so please do look in any of your countries to see who you might also bring on board, because sometimes from the inside of an institution, those institutional dynamics can sometimes get lost. And we need to think about the very formal political dynamics, whether that's the relationships between governments and the legislature, or the opposition and the government, but also the relationship between the administrative side of the House and also the political side of the House. Because without understanding the kind of dynamics that influence the normal workings of a parliament, it will make it harder to identify the reforms and how they might be brought about. Because one needs to identify actors to be made responsible for the reforms and the provision of services, such as disaggregated data that was introduced earlier in Sasha's talk. Who will be responsible for delivering these reforms, and what other political dynamics might get in the way to a rhetorical commitment to gender sensitive parliaments? You need to think about who institutional opponents might be, but also those who you can draw on to support gender sensitizing efforts. They may well be and must be inside Parliament, but also outside, to create an extra parliamentary demand, an extra parliamentary check on whether these changes are happening. So I rather rudely invited myself into the British Parliament to try and bring about change. And I was very much at that time aware only of the IPU's work, and use that to present an approach that really documented in the first instance what the gender insensitives of the UK Parliament were. And I think that really helps to capture what's wrong clearly and succinctly, so that in a sense people cannot query what's wrong and that you move on from that. And I think one of the things that an outsider who's coming in can do is bring that slightly more critical eye at times, but also knowledge that comes from the broader literature on gender and politics. If you're going to invite experts to be part of that, they will recognise that they're only one part of a network of parliamentary and extra parliamentary change actors, and they're entering institutions that they need to better understand. And that, I think, can give rise to processes where you need to be embedded and talking to both the political and administrative side. One of the key lessons from the IPU, and it's great to see that emphasised in the OSCE documentation, is to recognise that parliaments are not just about what MPs do, but are also about the institution as an organic place of work that has many different kinds of staff. And those questions about gender sensitivity cannot just apply to the political side of an institution. So I really recognised when I was in the British Parliament the potential for women MPs to work together, sometimes across party, sometimes very forcefully on particular activities. So when you're thinking about who will be the supporters or the leads on this, it is worth recognising the extent to which there is a group of MPs who share a gender awareness. To also think about political leadership on this issue. Are there those in government or in leadership positions in the Parliament who will also take this on board? So it was mentioned in the introduction that I'm currently working with the Scottish Parliament, and I think it's quite clear that speakers or presiding officers of parliaments can have very important symbolic and resource implications for the success of an audit, because they carry with them the institution. But also to explore and support those on the administrative side who may also be bringing gender expertise. It may be formally recognised because that is part of their job description at the moment, but it might also be the case that there are people working on the administrative side who are also aware at this point of many of the gender insensitivities, and they need to be brought into the relationships that will help support gendered institutional change. So looking for work amongst women MPs, relations between the women in the government and the Parliament, and in leadership positions, and in the administrative side of the house. And of course, I started by stressing that this is no longer about women fixing the institutions. And again, Sasha used that term too, and I love that term. It's about also delegating responsibility, looking for responsibility. Those in political positions of power within a parliament need to be brought on board. This is about institutional change. There will be men, because of the way our parliaments are currently configured, in positions of power that need to be leading on these kind of agendas. And so we can think about how change comes about. And the notion of a cycle, I think, is really important, and action plans. But I would also ask parliaments to think about what capacities do they currently have. Might they need to create a new body, a women's committee or a parliamentary committee, a speakers advisory group, some kind of institutional actor that takes this responsibility, so it stops being the labour that's done when there's a little bit of extra time or by the people who really care. So to really think about whether there is sufficient institutional capacity at the moment to really take it forward. And that's what I found in the British Parliament. There wasn't an existing body or group of people, and we had to create a new one. And of course, that takes resourcing and that takes leadership for somebody in power to do that. But I think it's important to recognise that gender-sensitive parliamentary change requires resourcing, and that might mean a new institutional body to carry that. And from international lesson learning, we can really see the importance of that. So let me just end then by reinforcing a couple of points. When you're considering undertaking gender-sensitive parliamentary change, do look to see who your gender and politics experts are in the academic world, in the civil society world, and where appropriate, bring those on board. I know from my academic colleagues that there are many around the world in lots of different countries who are really trying to support parliaments and would be very happy to do that. I've just, as Sasha mentioned, just come back from Japan, where I'm seeing exactly that kind of relationship, trying to instigate institutional change with a relationship of academic support to parliaments. To recognise the administrative and the political side of the institution, and to really take note of those existing toolkits, standards, guidelines, and really implement them. We do not lack a definition of gender-sensitive parliaments. We do not lack an understanding of processes of change. What we currently lack, I think, is the institutional will in some places and institutional capacity. And I think that's where we really need to put our focus. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Childs, for this interesting presentation. I think also my colleagues will share your report from the UK Parliament, the Good Parliament report, as I think it's also useful for all the participants to see it. I also noticed that we have one comment in the chat, which I will read later on during the question and answer session, so you can maybe all reflect on it. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Bojana Jelušić, Chair of the Gender Equality Committee, Parliament of Montenegro. With her work, she's taking reforms forward, aiming at making the Montenegrin Parliament a fully gender-sensitive institution. Under her leadership, the Parliament actually adopted its second action plan to promote gender equality in the legislature. Ms. Jelušić is also expert on media literacy and has background in secondary school education, and that is why I assume that she has also worked very much on education system reforms, among other things. Ms. Jelušić, you have the floor.
Thank you. Warm regards for all. Well, that's a small country and small parliament, and looking at the gap between 1991 OSCE Moscow document and 2010, when the law of gender equality was adopted in Montenegro. Montenegro is late for 20 years, maybe. But nevertheless, I do think that the situation is not much worse than in some other Western democracies, since we have various obstacles on that path we are following toward gender equality. And they are institutional, but they are still mental, and stereotypes and systemic injustice of patriarchy we are facing in all our countries, especially when you are from the small, rather patriarchal country like Montenegro, experiencing pretty hard political divides and the strengthening of nationalism, which is not only in Montenegro, but all over the world. It is a sort of global and local happening. And in that times, maybe gender equality just comes somehow in a shadow, but nevertheless, it could be even the chance for something better, to some improvement. Well, short ID, there is 81 members of parliament in Montenegro, 23 are women. It means approximately 28%. So you can see not even the 30, which was well the target. And as for the convocation of the parliament, about service of parliament, 70% are women and 30% are men. You can see again, as for the women, the higher they go, the fewer they are. So that's the problem. Somehow, I would say that maternal discrimination is somehow the main problem, and will still persist in all democracies. And because of that, it is very important to change things through institution. Our work as a Committee for Gender Equality was last year pretty much tuned with the OSCE improvements and trying to help Parliament to develop full gender responsibility in all three areas Sasha mentioned. So shortly and generally, action plan for the Gender Responsible Assembly 22-24 in May, institutional mechanism for gender equality. Also in May, improving the political participation of women in Montenegro. In June consideration of a national gender equality strategy 21-25, we can see that only 50% of activities are fully accomplished. And so we change approach, trying to develop tools for low scrutiny, ex ante and post legislative scrutiny to gather more knowledge how to do that, and how to really improve complete gender audits and gender action plans, not in being glorious in whole, but to be more effective in everything. When it is up to the IPE projects in Montenegro, you know that EU set out that by 2025, at least 85% of all development aid projects will contribute to the empowerment of women and girls. And we can see that in Montenegro, there is no one such a plan which is completely focused on the empowerment of women and girls. This is the research of an NGO organization from Montenegro. Our committee has very intensive cooperation with the others. So it is important to see that Parliament really have great duties to improve things. What are the main problem? Although the law of gender equality stipulates the obligation to create every law and every public policy so that it takes into account the needs of men and women, only a small number of bylaws, strategies, action plans, and programs contain provisions that encourage greater participation of women in decision-making and access to resources. There is a low level of information about the obligation to apply the law on gender equality, both between MPs and in the professional service. There is very little interest in MPs in the mentioning activities, especially when it comes to workshops, training, and seminars. Everybody think they know everything, and that is the main problem, which is up to the Parliament members. We were focused mostly on gender responsible budgeting, which in this term of Parliament become an obligation in this and we cooperate with the State Audit Office to control and audit the success of those budget funds. But the analysis of the last adopted law and budget show that not even all ministries fully apply or understand the obligation to take into account the law on gender equality. We fight in Parliament for special laws. The last example for just an illustration is our intervention on the law on public procurement, where certain points are provided for all bidders who have women in their boards or plan to open working places for women. And it was a really strong fight in plenary for that law and change of law to be adopted. Our committee is pretty much visible, and I can't say that it makes revolutionary changes. It rather goes step by step, and the cooperation with the OSCE is of great importance. And well, thanks to that cooperation, we can manage to do much more. And the next problem, it first was about knowledge and interest in and everything which is in mind of MPs and service. Our committee need to be much stronger. It means that it can't be only responsible for only one law of gender equality, but it should have expanded competence similar to the way of it is regulated by the rules of procedure for the legislative committee or the committee for economy or finance and budget committee, because the gender equality is something which goes through all the laws, all the social and economical system of the country. And it is necessary to strengthen the capacities of the secretariat of the committee, which consists of only 4 women. And because of that, I can say that we need a lot of knowledge. And because of that, OSCE is so important for us, and our visibility owe pretty much to the actual works of OSCE regarding audits and gender action plans. So we made something different this time. We fight much stronger, and nevertheless, it is step by step. I do think that persistent committee should make certain changes. Nevertheless, I will stay to the opinion that in every track profession, so-called in every professions, fight against mental restrictions are maybe the most important. And I do think that marriage and children appear to boost men's careers and slow or stop women's career. And because of that, our responsibility is to have a broader picture and strengthen institution, because in new era of and in new work environment, it would be higher pressure and longer working hours. And I do think that men and women should rethink together how to improve democracy and economy of their countries. Thank you.
Dear Ms. Jelušić, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. If you also have some documents that you think are useful for other participants, please send them to us and we can share them together with the notes from the meeting. Thank you again. Our last speaker for today is Mr. Kenneth Forslund, First Deputy Speaker of the Swedish Riksdag, Chairperson of the Riksdag's Working Group on Gender Equality. He is a member of Swedish Parliament since 2002 and was able to follow and contribute to the overall transformation of the Swedish Parliament. By background, Kenneth Forslund is communication expert, and among other things, one of his main policy focuses is the foreign policy. Kenneth Forslund confirms that the Swedish approach to gender equality, where men are on equal terms part of gender equality processes. Mr. Forslund, please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And dear President, Margareta Cederfelt of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, dear fellow speakers, dear participants in this seminar, thank you for the invitation and the possibility to talk about our Swedish Parliament's experiences of working with gender action plans to improve the quality in our Parliament. I'm participating in this seminar in the capacity as a chairperson of the Parliamentary Working Group on Gender Equality, as you heard. And I also want to highlight the fact that I also have a deputy chairperson. We are both deputy speakers of the Parliament. I'm representing the Social Democrats. Ms. Julia Kronlid is representing the Sweden Democrats, and this makes the leadership of this gender equality group a bipartisan issue, and I think that that is also important in this work. The background to how the gender equality work is organized in the Swedish Parliament with a cross-party working group goes back to 1995. The Speaker of the Parliament at the time, Ms. Birgitta Dahl, invited one women MP from each political party back then, not as many as today, but still all the parties, and invited them to a meeting. At this meeting, she wanted to discuss how it would be possible to cooperate to maximize the benefits of the good gender representation. And this meeting led to an ongoing discussion, and it still continues. One result back then was the establishment of childcare services for the children of MPs here in the Swedish Parliament. You could bring your children with you when you go to the Parliament, not as the ordinary position for the children, but from time to time. And another one was the decision to introduce fixed voting times, all in order to make it easier to combine political work with family life. As said, this meeting was the start of the Parliament's work on gender equality issues, and later on in 2006, the Parliament took the decision that the Riksdag should have a work group for gender equality then. And this decision in turns leads to where we are today. Today, the working group on gender equality is well established, reports directly to the Riksdag board, and consists of an equal number of men and women, where all 8 parties of the Parliament have 1 seat. I'm leading the group, and as I said, and we are now in a new election period and starting up the work for this 4-year term then. The work group and its work is structured according to a work plan that is set up for every new election period, and which defines the prioritized areas of work and specific actions to be taken. The group that operates now, which I share, was elected in December 2022, so it's very newly instated, and it's now in its starting process of drafting a work plan for the period to 2022 to 26. When it comes to the gender equality of the Swedish Parliament of today, we have a relatively high proportion of equality in numbers. After the September election, we have 46.1% women in the Parliament out of 349. But members of Parliament should also have the same actual conditions and opportunities to perform their official duties regardless of gender. So it's not just a mathematical question of how many that is representing. By highlighting gender equality issues and working systematically, the conditions for achieving a gender equal Parliament can constantly be improved. A previous survey carried out here in the Parliament shows that female and male members of the Riksdag feel that they have equal opportunities when it comes to exercising an influence and having political impact. However, among young women as a group, the general feeling is that there are greater challenges. They feel that they are questioned to a greater extent and that they are expected to be better informed than other groups in the Parliament. There are also problems with domination techniques and abusive treatments. Women feel in general that greater demands are placed upon them and they are more worried about making mistakes. Another factor that particularly affects women, and especially young women MPs to an increasing extent, is the threats and violations, primarily through social media. As said, we are now in the process of drafting the work program for this election period, so I cannot say for certain what our priorities will be the coming years, but so far we have discussed to make a survey on how the members experience their working conditions today, and also try to find methods on how to tackle abuses in social media. However, when it comes to the last election period, the main priorities were twofold. The first was on how we as MPs treat each other, with the goal to raise knowledge and awareness on the significance of gender when it comes to power and influence. Within this priority, we had researchers conducting a study on the perception of leadership positions in the parliament. The study showed the great majority of leaders who were interviewed are very happy with their assignments and that their work environment on the whole is felt to be positive. The study also showed that as far as nominations and opportunities for exercising leadership are concerned, the Swedish parliament has become more gender equal over time. However, it also showed that there are problems that remain. For example, signs of informal and subtle obstacles, which primarily seems to be putting women at a disadvantage. In addition, the study also showed that despite that the nominations of leading positions in the parliament is reasonably gender equal, numerically speaking, it still is more common for women to share soft committees, healthcare, schooling, and so on, while hard committees, transport, defense, and so on, are shared to a greater extent by men. Additional activities connected to the priority on how we treat one another. We offered seminars on communication strategies. We arranged seminars on online harassment. And in regards to sexual harassment, the support for MPs was improved the last term with extended number of talks or opportunities to talk with a psychologist that is offered. The second priority was ensuring that the balance between official duties and family responsibilities is facilitated. The way the MP's work week is organized affects the possibility to combine their assignment in Parliament with parenthood and family life in general. The working week in the Riksdag has for long been on location at the Riksdag on Tuesday to Thursday, with work in the home constituency on Friday to Monday. In this way, the MPs come closer not only to their voters, but also their families. The same applies to the weeks when there are no meetings of the chamber during the parliamentary year. We have specific weeks that we are out of session to be able to be back home or abroad during the session year. For MPs who have family in Stockholm, especially, the fixed voting times have been a great help. Within this priority, we made additional adjustments the last term of the voting times on Thursdays for the MPs to be able to reach their home earlier, or even in some distant cases, be able to reach their home in the same night as Parliament was closing down on Thursday. Changes in the opening hours of the childcare facility here in the Parliament was also made. I want to end by summarizing that we have identified as key factors for the successful gender equality work in our Parliament to work systematically and with a long-term perspective, to have the work based on research studies, which helps us to determine our priorities. We have all political parties, all 8 parties, and as many men as women involved in the work. To have the group led by a person representing the presiding officers of the Riksdag is also important to really put this in focus and at the top level of the work in the Parliament. To have a budget, of course, also provides sufficient scope for working with these issues, because everything at the end, all the time, always comes down to financials, one has to admit. Thank you very much.
Dear Mr. Forslund, thank you very much for your presentation. With this, we have concluded the presentations from the speakers. Before opening the questions and answer session, let me just reiterate a few rules. All questions, comments, and interventions shall be limited to 3 minutes so that we can give chance to as many participants as possible to intervene. We will also warn you when your time is over. Participants should request the floor through the chat function, and I've seen that many of you have already done so. And when given the floor, you can address the speakers by unmuting your microphone. Otherwise, I will also be reading questions that are already written in the chat. And finally, we will do our best to give all interested participants an opportunity to speak, depending on the time. So first, I would like to turn to the questions that were written in the chat, and I see that some of them are already responded to, but maybe speakers would like to add something more. The first question came from Jeromine Andolfatto, Policy and Campaigns Officer from European Women's Lobby, who asked how to ensure that there is political will and binding actions that are taken to gender-sensitive parliaments beyond gender audits. The second question was asked by Ms. Angelina Sharanovic, Gender Equality Committee from Montenegro, who outlined 5 necessary steps for good gender-sensitive oversight and is asking our speakers whether they agree with it. The steps are the following. 1, to embed gender from the beginning. 2, to understand the situation by gathering evidence. 3, to ask the right questions. 4, to inspire changes if it is discovered that the law discriminates men or women. And number 5, to monitor the outcome. So these are the 2 questions. And while our speakers can think about it, and I see that Professor Childs has already replied shortly, I would also like the opportunity to Ms. Ermonella Fela. I would like now to give opportunity to Ms. Ermonella Felai from the Parliament of Albania, as she asked an opportunity to intervene. Ms. Felai, you have the floor. Maybe we will turn to Ms. Felai in a bit. In the meantime, I will give the floor to Ms. Angelina Sharanovic from the Gender Equality Committee of Montenegro. Ms. Sharanovic, you have the floor.
Hello to everyone. I'm going to switch my screen because this is the building with a poor connection. So I will switch it now and give an example that I wrote on. So let me give that example. For example, government introduces a grant for all business owners. Eligibility for the grant based on the amount of businesses earned in the previous year. The grant scheme appears to be not discriminatory, as it does not exclude women business owners. But scrutinizing this scheme in a gender-sensitive way, MP can ask the questions such as, can women and men access these funds equally in practice? An issue that may arise from this scrutiny concerns female business owners who took maternity leave in the past year. They would receive a similar grant than male business owners would. This was an unintentional policy design, but the result of decision.
Ms. Sharanovic, unfortunately, we're having an issue with your sound and our interpreters cannot interpret. Would you maybe mind writing this example in the chat and I can read it out loud?
Okay.
I apologize, but
Okay,
we just
don't
apologize.
worry. Okay.
Maybe we can try again with Ms. Ermonella Felai from Albania, if she is with us. No. In this case, I will turn back to speakers to comment on the questions that were written in the chat. Professor Childs, would you like to be the one to comment the first, since you already wrote your reply in the chat?
Yes, thank you. It's evaluating where your parliament is and what is the dominant view in respect of gender sensitive parliaments, who might be people who can be mobilized, which people might need to be politely quietened so they don't raise criticism. I think being very honest about how you identify those actors who are going to support what you're doing and those who are going to not stand in your way, as well as those who will stand in your way. So to try and ensure that reforms are both devised and embedded and become institutionalized, you need to have more than one strategy. So, of course, there will be, in all parliaments, it seems to me these days, people who support gender sensitive parliaments, but they may not be in the right positions of power. They may have a lot of desire, but not the resources. So I think it's about trying to identify who you can bring on board, who can be the champions of gender sensitive parliament. And that is about positionality, it is about resources, it is about visibility, it is about linking parliamentary reform to the concerns of people outside of parliament. So it becomes less a concern just of MPs or staff who work there, but becomes part of actually a conversation. Sorry, my lights have just gone off. I have to just get up a moment. I think it's because I'm too little. Sorry, what I'm trying to suggest is this needs to be a conversation about democracy and the health of our democratic institutions. And therefore, people outside of Parliament can help create a demand for change, that those in the Parliament can actually then work. It's also really good at this particular moment in time that we've got the IPU, OSCE, Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, AGA. You've got these international organisations working on this. So there's an international support base. Inter-parliamentary competition, I found in the British Parliament. If you can demonstrate another parliament's doing better than the British Parliament, they get rather upset. They want to be a good parliament. So you need to think strategically about what rationales, what arguments, what state of affairs are going to move people in your parliament. So what I tried to do in the chat was to suggest some very little but crucial ways of ensuring change happens. And I think the contribution from the Right Honourable Member from Sweden is really important, because that is a lesson that I took back to the UK Parliament, having a body that leads on this agenda, that is not men versus women, but men and women, that is not one party versus the others, that has an action plan and that is held to account for delivering on that. And I think international lesson learning, regional lesson learning, healthy inter-parliamentary competition, but also really recognising that where you can get change that really embeds, it's because you've designed reforms that become part of the everyday workings of the institution. So hopefully I've given you a number of ways, but in that first audit, make sure you have more than one recommendation targeting of insensitivity, because, for example, in the UK, on introducing quotas, which is quite problematic in the British case, at least for some parties, you perhaps call the Minister for Women for account, but then you also ask the Women and Equalities Committee to hold the Minister for Women to account. You also ask political parties to reconsider their position. So you target an insensitivity by linking it to individuals who could be and should be responsible, but you recognise that more than one actor gives you more chances of actually delivering on any one recommendation. And I hope that's given you a bit of a flavour of how you might go about some of that.
Thank you very much, Professor Childs. Maybe I could now ask Ms. Božena Jalušić to comment on any of the questions she would like to. We also had one question from the civil society organization from Bulgaria, asking what can civil society do to advance gender equality in elected office? Maybe you could comment on this, or another question that you would like to comment on.
Thank you for the question. I can comment on this because we found that the political parties maybe are the main obstacle toward gender equality. It is obvious looking at the leadership of political parties, and our last local elections show that they even didn't follow the procedure of law when it is up to the number of women on the electoral lists. So political parties somehow are not willing to fight that struggle. And it is very important to make something like the MP from Swedish Parliament reported us, and there should be more agreement between political parties that gender equality is not only the declaration on our path to EU integration, but really a plan of actions. And because of that, we cooperate pretty close with a lot of NGO organization and civic society in Montenegro. It is very important for us, and we got a lot of information, mostly from that area, even more than from the institution, which help us to improve certain things in the institution. And well, we changed somehow the political paysage in Montenegro, since we have, by the changes of the law, one vice president woman in every situation, more leaders of the committee on the committee management, and more representatives in some parliamentary teams. But for the second time in our whole history, we have a president of the parliament, which is woman. Again, it's only twice in Montenegrin history. So it is important because, well, the role model and the change on the very top level is important, just to show that maybe we could change things more than we did it till now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jalusic. I would also now like to turn to our third speaker, Mr. Kenneth Forslund, in case he has some of his reflections on the questions posed, perhaps also on the question related to what the civil society could do to advance gender equality in the elected office. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, and thank you for the questions. I tried to make a joint answer to them, a reflection on overall of them. The changes in Sweden in the mid-90s, they started out of a debate in the Swedish society about women's participation in both political life and in work life. The numbers of women working were high, but the numbers of women reaching high positions, responsible positions in both politics and industry, was low still back then. And there was people's movement organizing women and struggling for the women causes, and they were even thinking of starting a women's party. That wasn't carried out really back then. It happened 20 years later. With a party focusing on feminism, and actually almost got into the parliament in that election, 2014. But all this debate started to create changes, both in politics and in work life. And in politics, several of the parties back in the mid-90s took up to have zipped election ballots. There is no legal demand for that in Sweden. That is carried out by the parties themselves if they want to have that or not. Today you could see that almost all parties have quite balanced election ballots, not necessarily fully zipped ballots, but still there is a high participation of women candidates in almost all parties. And this has, of course, influenced the number of women in parliament, and by that also the number of women in the different committees here in the parliament, and finally also the chairmanship, the leadership of the committees. But as I said, it still is somewhat stereotypes that women are leading soft committees, men are leading hard committees, as I pointed out in my remark. I think that the most important thing for both women, for political parties, and for the civil society is to increase the pressure on women participation and women representation in society, in all sectors of society. Women are half of the population, or even slightly more than half of the population. They should have half of the power. I think it's as easy as that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Much appreciated. There was also one question directed to Sasha Gavric from Ms. Tajma Kapic, who is a postdoctoral researcher in Dublin City University and who is researching the political representation of women in post-conflict society. She's asking whether there are some examples where the need to conduct gender audits came from the parliaments directly, and if the NGOs would like to encourage their parliaments to do the gender audit, how to do this and how they should go about this. Sasha, if you would care to comment on this.
Thank you, Hannah. If you allow me, I'll try to sum up maybe also, and given also short responses to some other questions, and to give some of my thoughts. So I think there was a wonderful question from our colleague from the European Women's Lobby on the political will, how to ensure political will in order parliaments to take upon the gender-sensitive parliament's agenda. And I think it is very important that we break down political will, because what is components? Within political will, one component is really gender sensitivity or awareness on gender equality. So if there's no gender sensitivity among political stakeholders, then it's very hard, of course, to ensure that the parliament will act differently than the rest of the political system in a country. And the other element of political will besides awareness is, of course, then the commitment part that needs to be present, and that needs to be, just in order to make that happen, needs to be multi-party. So it needs to be something that's being owned by multiple stakeholders. I think that has been maybe said by other stakeholders before me, by other speakers, but I wanted really to highlight it, that I really believe that this multi-party ownership of the process is important. And in that sense, I really believe that audits can be helpful, because what audits do is that they demonstrate very often what is not present. And one of the things that Sarah Childs said is, of course, the issue around setting up bodies that will own the process. And I think that is crucial to be done after a gender audit, because once a body is there and it's formalized, especially, let's say, through the formal rules of procedures, and it's a body that has strength, and Božena Jelušić was referring to the weakness of some committees that we have seen in the Balkans and other parts of the OSCE region, then that body will make sure that the gender-sensitive parliaments and gender will flow continuously. To reflect on the question of Tajma, so how to make sure that gender audits processes are run by the parliament and what civil society should do. Our work with parliaments is in a lot of cases driven, of course, by the parliaments themselves. A wonderful example that took place without us is the gender audit of the Parliament of Ireland. They just did it on their own. They had a very participatory process. They involved civil society representatives. And I believe Sarah Childs can maybe reflect shortly on Scotland, where there was a very strong push-up from below, from NGOs to do that was taken upon by the Scottish Parliament. And a last point on parliaments taking upon civil society requests is the case of Malta. I believe that the reform that has been taking place in 2020 on changing the constitution and legislation to introduce a so-called gender corrective mechanism has been taken upon by the parliament from civil society requests and from working body that included very strong civil society representatives. Among others, in that report, the civil society representatives called upon the parliament to conduct an audit. So there are very interesting cases that can really lead gender-sensitive processes. And finally, our colleague Margarita from Bulgaria, she asked also about the question what to do in cases like Bulgaria, where we are seeing a continuous underrepresentation, and what can civil society do. I believe a key learning from a lot of locations is a simple tool, and these are coalitions. So coalitions that will bring together strong civil society organizations from the country and strong stakeholders from political parties in places that have a very low representation and very low of women and very low awareness of gender equality. Mainly this will be women, but let's hope that they will be also be able to mobilize some male politicians and male civil society representatives to push this agenda forward. And one of the tools that stands out there and that has significantly shaped the face of politics all around the OSCE region, especially East of Vienna, are gender quotas. In a lot of countries, legislated gender quotas have been the key tool that has helped significantly to move the agenda forward. I'll stop here and I'll give the mic back to you. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you for this great overview. We have another question in the chat. I think after this one, we can stop because we're running out of time. The question is coming from Elena Anchevska, researcher at the European Institute for Gender Equality. And she's asking, how can we better capture and address intersectional concerns in assessing gender sensitiveness of parliaments and devising gender action plans to make sure that attention is paid to intersection of gender inequalities with other characteristics such as race, ethnicity, bodily ability, etc. Maybe Professor Childs would like to comment on this, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. And it's interesting because actually when I was working on the British Parliament, I also, during my report, I talked about diversity sensitive parliaments. And I often now talk about gender and diversity sensitive to recognize that, first of all, that women are not the only underrepresented group in many parliaments, but also precisely because of questions around intersectionality. I think it goes back in many ways to questions of resourcing and data. Oftentimes Parliament may well keep data on the basis of sex or gender, but not go beyond that. So some of this is going to be about informing and educating parliaments about the importance of not just sex or gender disaggregated data, but intersectional data. I think it's also very important to ensure that recommendations look for the intra-group differences. So when you're designing solutions to issues, that you take very seriously those differences within a group. And increasingly, I'm of the view that we should start from thinking, when we're drawing up or drafting or developing possible solutions, is to think of the most marginalized or minoritized of those members of a group, because without bringing everybody on board, there is a risk that some of the reforms that might be adopted end up reproducing elite patterns of participation. So I think you're absolutely right. And it's about, I think, ensuring that those commitments are not just rhetorical about diversity of women, but also that any reforms you develop are themselves sensitive to diversity. And that's, again, about political will, but very much about resourcing. So, for example, when the British Parliament was working with the IPU formal audit of both houses of the British Parliament in 2018, on the back of my report recommendation, there was an attempt to try to do some of that, but there was a failure of data in some ways. And that means that you find yourself unable to capture the diversity insensitivities and or to recognize differences amongst women as well. So I think it's about a commitment again, and then about making sure resources are in place. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Childs. There were many questions and comments in the chat, but unfortunately we're not able to address them all. I would really suggest to everyone whose question maybe was not answered to write us separately, and we will be able to provide some sort of guidance and response, either Sasha or myself or anyone from the ODIHR and the PA. There was also a good example from representative of the Montenegro Parliament, but unfortunately there is no time to address all the questions. Maybe now, before the concluding remarks, I would like to give an opportunity to all speakers once more just 1 minute each to say your key recommendations or your key words from today, especially concerning maybe your suggestion to the member of parliament, what they can do in this regard and how to proceed with gender action plans and gender auditing. Maybe I can start in reverse order this time, and I will give the floor to Mr. Kenneth Forslund, just for your key remarks.
Thank you very much for that. I would say work systematically, involve both men and women, and involve all parties. No one should be able to drop out of this, and also bring the work up at the highest level of the parliament. There has to be a leadership and a participation from the leadership to point out that this is prioritized. Those are my most important points. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Ms. Božena Jelušić, please, for your concluding words.
Thank you. I would point once that gender equality shouldn't be the issue per se, and we just shouldn't forget the people and women with multiple discrimination, especially persons with disabilities, LGBT population, minority groups. So in action plans, we should have special zones, special areas, and we can use professionals and specialists from civic sector. It is very important for all of us to know how to deconstruct the laws, how to open them and see what are the main problems regarding the possibilities for women and girls and all the minority groups, which should be just followed like gender equality issue in whole.
Excellent, thank you very much. And now the final words of Professor Childs, if you would like to share something with us.
Gosh, that feels rather responsible. I would distinguish between gender sensitive parliaments as a noun, a thing, and gender sensitizing parliaments as a set of actions. And that what matters is that there is a strategic development of a process that can bring about institutional change. Change it rarely happens organically. And then my final point was, don't worry if what happens immediately seems incremental. Multiple incremental changes can be transformative. So you might have to start where your parliament is, in one area, in one aspect of the functions, but there are toolkits, there are guidelines, there are standards, there are approaches, there are field guides to how to do this, as we've seen today. And so therefore, it seems to me that wherever your parliament is, whatever resources, whatever political leadership you've got, there is a means to start this process. And there is support out there from various international organizations, academics, civil society. So I would really want to be positive and say small steps can be hugely.
I think we have lost you for a moment, but I think we got the main message in any case. Thank you very much, Professor Childs. Maybe I will now turn to Sasha, if you have something to add at the end, please.
Yeah, I'll add maybe two really short sentences. So one, as a comment that has been said by Sarah Childs, count on academia and civil society, because you're already counting on international organizations, on ODIHR, on the IPU, on all kinds of stakeholders, but count on their knowledge and their experience, because in every country has wonderful civil society, women's movements, and very strong academics. And my second point is a secondment on what Gordana Čomić, former Serbian MP and minister, has written in the chat. She said that we need to understand gender sensitive activity of parliaments or gender audits of parliaments in a broader context, and that it is extremely linked to the question of gender auditing of political parties and the local level of governance. And that is really true. So use gender audits as a tool for transformation of all the institutions, including parliaments. Thank you a lot.
Wonderful. Great, Sasha. And finally, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Yulia Netesova, Chief of Democratic Governance and Gender Unit from ODIHR, who is also a dear colleague. Yulia will provide us with some closing remarks reflecting on the ways forward. Please, Yulia, you have the floor.
Dear Hannah, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear friends and partners, dear distinguished speakers, lovely to see you today. I had a very small team of gender activists in ODIHR who is behind the publication that is released today, and who actually not only produces the knowledge, but also implements the practices then together with our dear counterparts in OSCE participating states. It's really nice to see so many people with whom we already work. This event is really a big success. We have vice speakers, we have members of the parliaments, we have chairpersons of committees, we have distinguished academicians, and also our OSCE colleagues from different field offices. The energy has been really amazing. I mean, we started 2 hours ago, the time really flew. Thank you so much. I can only imagine what it would have been if we all were together in person. I will just take a moment to reflect upon what was said today, and will quote our ODIHR director, who said in his remarks that our goal is 50-50, gender parity, not less, not more. This is what we aim for, to fix the underrepresentation, numerical and significant, and gender audit is one of the tools that we advance and offer in ODIHR together with our counterparts. I would like to express the big gratitude to the team who made this possible. So to Sasha Gavrich, who pushed this first as a publication on gender-sensitive parliaments in OSCE, and then this step-by-step guidance note that really shows to any interested parliaments who want to do gender audit, but maybe not know what it means, they can now see the step-by-step guidance document and see this will mean A, B, C, D. So thank you very much, dear Sasha, and also, really, really warm thanks to Hannah, who supported us, who was our focal point from OSCPA. Dear colleagues, this is the first joint publication. OSCPA for us is a really important counterpart. It puts together all of the parliaments of OSCE space, and joining together and bringing this to the audience for us is really a big success. I hope you will all check our website, download the publication that is now in English and Russian, and will then potentially consider applying it in your home countries. It was really lovely after the guide presentation to hear about different country practices from academia, starting from academia, dear Professor Childs, who worked in numerous places. Montenegro, a fantastic country, maybe a small one, dear Bozena, but very active, and thank you very much for your leadership. It's a pleasure and honor to work with you. And from Sweden, that has really given an example of how things can go to the next level when there is an advisory group set up that doesn't depend on the outcome of elections, where gender is sort of being depoliticized and becomes a standard feature of the work of the parliament. I think it's really great, and thank you very much, dear Kenneth Forsland, for sharing this experience from your country. And then we had a great discussion, and thank you so much for throwing light on so many other optics and aspects of parliamentary life. For your information, dear colleagues, we also work on different angles, trying to make parliaments what we call modern parliaments, good parliaments. So from the point of view of disability, from the point of youth participation and public integrity. These are discussions, for different events, but just to confirm, it's not possible to work just on gender equality. The number of topics is way larger. And I will allow myself to give 3 conclusions, 3 ideas. Just to remind that it doesn't matter what kind of political system your country has, presidential, parliamentary, mixed, parliaments remain a central democratic institution. Parliaments are well positioned and mandated to lead by example, to demonstrate how a public institution can take gender equality seriously in its daily work, but also as part of long-term and strategic goals. This remains very important. The second, the IPU in its Kigali Declaration from October 2022 reminded us all that there is a need for stronger commitment to the idea of gender-sensitive parliament. I believe that all OSCE participating states are members of IPU and hence took this commitment upon themselves to conduct gender audits and to develop gender action plans that aim at systematic institutional change. And the third point is that OSCE, ODIHR, our field offices, OSCPA, we stand ready to support national parliaments in conducting gender audit and continuing work towards becoming gender-sensitive institution. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We were established by OSCE participating states to be at the service of democratic institutions, including parliaments, political parties, and civil society. And finally, please let me use this opportunity to express gratitude to our English and Russian language interpreters, and as well as international sign language interpreters. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Without you, our event would not be a success and would not be accessible to a larger audience. So thank you very much. And please allow me to wish all of you a fruitful year. May it bring to all of us peace, prosperity, and gender equality. Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Until we meet again.
Thank you, Yulia. Thank you for the wonderful closing words. We will make sure to collect all the questions that were in the chat, and we will produce sort of recommendations from this event, which will be distributed to all participants. In this document, we will also share our contact details, so you are all free to contact us and approach us at any time for any sort of guidance, advice that you might need. I truly hope that you all found this event very useful and interesting. I believe that we can all agree that there are still significant challenges in conducting gender auditing within the parliaments, especially having in mind that each and every parliament is different, as we have reminded ourselves today. But this should not discourage us. On the contrary, it's critical that we continue talking about these issues and looking for adequate and long-lasting solutions. And my colleagues at ODIHR and we at the PA truly believe that events such as this one are really, really crucial for that. Having said that, we hope that you find the new guidance document useful. Please do not hesitate to contact us in case you have any questions. And with this, we have come to an end of today's event. Before we close this session, I would like to thank again to our speakers for their really fantastic insights and presentations, and all the participants for sharing their views on this important topic and for being so active in the chat. It's really much appreciated. And finally, a big thank you goes to the OSCE President, Margareta Sederfeld, and ODIHR Director, Matteo Mecacci, as well as the OSCE Secretary General, Roberto Montella, for their continued support for our work. And finally, to all colleagues in ODIHR and the OSCE who worked on organizing this event. Thank you. The meeting is closed. Bye.